Supreme Court has just issued a major ruling on abortion in this country, the most consequential since Roe v. Wade was overturned 2 years ago. Now, this case concerns the availability and access to the abortion pill mifepristone. Just moments ago, the court ruling unanimously to maintain availability. It will stay where it is in this country. I want to bring in Terry Moran live at the Supreme Court. Essentially, the justices on the court said the plaintiffs here lacked the legal right to challenge availability of mifepristone on a number of counts.
Exactly, David. This is a big case. It's a big case on abortion rights, specifically on that drug mifepristone, which has been the source of so much controversy. The FDA's approval of mifepristone for use was challenged by a group of doctors. These are not doctors who treat pregnant women or who perform abortions at all. They had conscience objections. They were anti-abortion rights, pro-life in their lingo, doctors who objected to the approval of mifepristone. They said that at some point, perhaps in some emergency room, they would find a woman who had complications from taking mifepristone, and that would violate their conscience. What the Supreme Court said is that's not a real injury under the law. In order to bring a lawsuit, you have to have standing. That means you have to be deliberately affected by that law, not some conscience objection, especially since this law has exceptions for doctors who do not want to have anything to do with performing abortions. And so in a unanimous opinion, how often do you hear that from the Supreme Court, written by Justice Brett Kavanaugh, with a concurring opinion by Justice Thomas, but unanimous in the result, Supreme Court says this kind of case brought essentially by activists rather than physicians who are treating this issue with this drug is not enough to get you into federal court and make a claim. It is essentially keeping the action in the courts limited to people who genuinely are impacted by this, so that someone who merely has an ideological or religious or conscience objection to what the government is doing can't just come into court and say, I'm injured because of that. You have to stop it. And so the bottom line, mifepristone remains available as it has been for women, including in the most recent FDA action, which made it available to people without having to go to a doctor. During the pandemic, they did that. All of the controversy over this drug now at this point seems settled by this unanimous opinion by the Supreme Court.
Let's just broaden out here for a moment, Terry, reporting this unanimous decision from the court on the issue of mifepristone. The justices on the court essentially telling those who brought the case they lack the legal right to challenge this. They don't prescribe the drug. They listed a number of other reasons why they don't have the right to challenge. But again, for those of you watching here this morning, mifepristone can be prescribed and sent through the mail in many states in this country. And of course, in the wake of the rollback of Roe versus Wade, this is a significant ruling. It means that mifepristone will still be available in many states in this country. It is used for the majority of abortions in the U.S. by women who are up to 10 weeks pregnant. So, Terry, this is significant, and bring the audience up to speed as to where mifepristone is still available here in the U.S.
Well, that obviously depends on state-to-state laws right now. In those states, and there's a big controversy about that because it can be mailed now under the 2021 revisions by the FDA during the pandemic, saying that women did not have to have an in-person doctor's visit to receive a prescription for mifepristone. Many of the states which have sought to limit or virtually eliminate access to abortion are objecting to that. But this ruling does not touch any of that. That is for a future case or controversy. And I just want to read one line from Justice Brett Kavanaugh's opinion for a unanimous court. He recognized why this case was brought. Justice Kavanaugh, writing for the court, the plaintiffs have sincere moral, ideological, and policy objections to elective abortion and to the FDA's relaxed regulation of mifepristone. But under the Constitution, Justice Kavanaugh says, those kinds of objections alone do not establish a case or controversy that the judiciary can resolve. And he says that's what really the democratic processes are for. They can go and try and elect a president they want who can change those regulations at the FDA. They can try to have Congress pass a law. But bringing a suit like this won't work.
Terry, thank you. Stick with us here because in this decision, they go on to say the plaintiffs may present their concerns and objections to the president and to the FDA in the regulatory process, again, pointing out essentially the power of the FDA in decisions like this one. And of course, this has been standing for decades, essentially, here in this country. Let's bring in David Muir. This would be appear to be a major victory for the FDA this morning.
A huge win, David, for not only the agency, but also the drug industry, which came out in force against this challenge to mifepristone, warning that if courts could strip away the availability of some individual drug that had been approved by scientists for decades, it could imperil access to any number of medicines, considering things like special life-saving drugs developed with embryonic stem cells, or HIV/AIDS treatments, or fertility drugs for IVF. So the industry today is breathing a big sigh of relief as well, David.
Devin, thank you. Let's bring in Kate Shaw, our legal analyst. And Kate, obviously, this post-Roe America, the rollback of Roe versus Wade, a lot of eyes on this particular decision this morning. What do you make of the unanimous decision here today that comes in the wake of the overturning of Roe in this country?
Well, enormous on-the-ground impact, David, in that mifepristone, as you said, is the most common way of ending an early pregnancy today, particularly in the post-Dobbs era. And so right now, mifepristone remains available on the terms that the FDA has decided are safe and consistent with, the effective use of the drug. And so I do think that the FDA and the drug industry in general, and, pregnant women who wish to terminate early pregnancies are all breathing a sigh of relief today. I mean, I would say one thing, which is that, so this case is over and the drug remains available on the terms that the FDA has set. But there's another case waiting in the wings, actually brought by states instead of individual doctors who object to abortion and to mifepristone. And those states may have an easier time convincing lower courts and even the Supreme Court that they have the legal right to be in court challenging mifepristone and its availability. So I wouldn't say that this issue is definitively resolved for all time, even though this case is and mifepristone remains available. But in the short term, at least, any efforts to restrict access to mifepristone, I think, will be directed at the FDA and the executive branch because, a different president could make a different set of directives. The FDA could change its decision about mifepristone. So, I think this issue is far from definitively resolved, even though this case is over.
Yeah, no question about that. So, Kate, essentially, again, big picture here, the issue of abortion rights, the Supreme Court has signaled with the overturning of Roe, belongs at the state level. And today, in particular, when it comes to mifepristone, they're saying this, it still belongs to the decision-making with the president and the FDA, though, as you point out, those who want to bring a case involving the abortion pill could, and we say, and might, again, this is not the case, the situation that we're looking at this morning, but might have better luck, if you will, at least getting the case considered if they bring this up at the state level.
Well, that's absolutely right, but actually even in federal court. So actually a couple of states have intervened in the lower court in an aspect of this litigation. So I think it's just a question of when and how these same questions get presented to the federal courts and ultimately to the Supreme Court, but with a different group of plaintiffs, say states that are anti-abortion states who are making essentially the argument that the availability of mifepristone makes it difficult for them to enforce their complete abortion bans. And so they have a right to be in court raising these legal objections. The substantive objections are to the process that the FDA used to approve mifepristone and then relax the restrictions on it. So all of that, I think, is, a couple of years out, probably.
So, Kate, just bottom line here, mifepristone, the abortion pill, remains available in the same way that it is going into today's decision because of this unanimous decision from the court. But you've made it very clear that the issue is far from over here, at least when it comes to mifepristone.
Absolutely. That's right, David.
Kate Shaw with us as well. Kate Shaw, along with Devin and Terry, watching any other decisions of importance, significant importance coming from the court. In the meantime, let's go to Rachel Scott, who is covering the presidential campaign. Obviously, she's outside a Trump event in Washington, D.C. today. And Rachel, Donald Trump has actually talked about the abortion pill in recent days.
Exactly, David. Right now, the former president is meeting with Republicans at the Capitol Hill Club behind me, just blocks away from the U.S. Capitol. The former president has been asked about the issue of abortion repeatedly over the last several weeks. He said recently that he has strong views on whether the abortion pill mifepristone should be further restricted. He insisted that he would be releasing his policy on that weeks ago. So far, the Trump campaign and the former president has not released anything on whether the former president believes that this pill should be further restricted. it is Donald Trump who, of course, appointed 3 of the 5 Supreme Court justices who overturned Roe versus Wade. And that is a big part of his legacy. It's a big reason why President Joe Biden has campaigned on the issue of abortion rights, putting the blame squarely on Donald Trump for some of the consequences that we are seeing ripple across the nation. Big picture here, David, this is absolutely critical. 21 states have severely restricted access to abortion since Roe versus Wade was overturned. 14 states have near total bans on abortion. But the reason why this decision certainly matters here is because if the Supreme Court decided that mifepristone, the abortion pill used in more than half of abortions in the United States, could be further restricted, that would have had a major impact even in states where abortion is currently legal. And so as of now, people will still be able to access the abortion pill, mifepristone, by mail without multiple doctor's appointments as well. And that is critical. It's something that many abortion providers were concerned about heading into this. This is the first time that we are seeing the Supreme Court weigh in on this issue since Roe versus Wade was overturned. And obviously, they are also considering another case about whether hospitals can turn away patients who desperately need a medical abortion care, David.
Rachel, just real quickly, since we're covering this presidential race so closely, it is essentially tied in the national polling between Donald Trump and President Biden. As each day goes by, one of them is 1 point ahead of the other, and it switches back and forth. We know this will come down to the battleground states that determine the Electoral College, and in those states, in many of those cases, Donald Trump shows some strength, a couple of points ahead of President Biden. That's why the issue of abortion rights, any one of these issues could be a turning point because the election will be decided sort of on the margins here. So when we're talking about abortion rights in this country, let's bring people up to speed in both camps very quickly here. Former President Trump said in recent days that he would have a lot more to say about abortion rights in this country. Obviously, he's taken credit for the overturning of Roe, said he'd have much more to say, but we haven't seen anything really presented to the American voter here.
No, and definitely not on the abortion pill mifepristone. The former president teased that he would be releasing more on his policy on that. He has not gone any further. He also left the door open to allowing states to prosecute women who wanted to seek abortion. David, this is an issue that could define this election. We know President Biden will be running on it, but also this is an issue that is going to be on the ballot in as many as a dozen states, including several battleground states, Pennsylvania, Florida, which Democrats believe could be in play for them, as well as Arizona. And so Democrats are going to continue to run on this issue of abortion rights, drawing a very sharp contrast to former President Donald Trump. It is important to note here that in all 6 states where abortion rights has been on the ballot, the issue of abortion rights has won every single time, David.
And so we can be assured that President Biden will continue. Vice President Kamala Harris has been out in those battlegrounds talking about the issue of abortion rights in this country. And so on the flip side, they will continue to press very hard forward, knowing that this could be a decisive issue come November. Rachel, thank you for that. Let's get right back to Terry Moran before we go off the air here. Terry, bottom line, unanimous decision from the Supreme Court. As you pointed out earlier, very rare to use those words, a unanimous decision. But essentially what the court has said today is that the abortion pill, mifepristone, the availability of it in many cases through the mail, will stay exactly as it is here in America.
That's right, and that is because the court unanimously, this includes Justice Samuel Alito, Justice Clarence Thomas, who have been so strong on the other side of the abortion rights issue. They, too, because it has to do with how people get to court. You have to be genuinely injured for the court to examine something. And these doctors said their consciences were at risk if they had to treat someone who had complications from mifepristone. And the court emphasizes that federal law contains many conscience protections. Justice Kavanaugh writing, federal conscience laws definitively protect doctors from being required to perform abortions or to provide other treatment that violates their consciences. And he goes on to say a doctor may simply refuse. Federal law protects doctors from repercussions when they have refused. And so for anyone who thinks that doctors have somehow been forced now to do something that violates their conscience, their religious beliefs, the Supreme Court reinforces what federal law already says. You don't have to. What this does is say that in order to bring a case to court, any case, you have to be genuinely injured by the law, not just that you object to it.
Yes, personally affected in some significant way. Terry Moran at the Supreme Court with the breaking news this morning. Our thanks to Terry, Devin, Kate, and Rachel. Again, the Supreme Court ruling unanimously that access to mifepristone, the abortion pill here in the U.S., will remain exactly as it is. They have not moved to restrict it in any kind of way today. We're going to return to regular programming. I'll see you later today for World News Tonight. For many of you, Good Morning America continues in the West. Have a great day. I'll see you soon.
This has been a special report from ABC News.
Welcome to ABC News Live. First, you're watching continued coverage now after this unanimous decision from the Supreme Court to preserve access to the abortion drug mifepristone. The medication was used in nearly 2/3 of all abortions in the U.S. last year. This is the court's first abortion decision since overturning Roe v. Wade 2 years ago, and it could have restricted access to mifepristone across the country, including in states where abortion remains legal. But the justices here ruled that the plaintiffs in this case lacked the legal right to sue because they were not directly injured by the increased access to mifepristone. This was a group of doctors who do not prescribe mifepristone, use mifepristone, or otherwise perform abortions. But they were trying to make the argument that this case injured their conscience. The increased access to mifepristone had injured their conscience in the possibility that a woman having complications from mifepristone could potentially come into the emergency room and require their care. I want to bring in our ABC News senior national correspondent, Terry Moran, here, because Terry, ultimately the judges decided here that that argument that these doctors could potentially see a woman having complications from mifepristone in the emergency room was not enough to give them standing in this case.
That's right, Diane. It wasn't enough, and that's because of a lot of things. First, this notion of how you bring a case in court in the United States, the court calls it a bedrock principle of constitutional law. You have to be directly impacted, injured is the word they use, by a law in order to object to it in court. And these doctors, they don't treat women with mifepristone. They don't prescribe mifepristone. They have nothing to do with it. They said at some future date, one of their members, this was a group of anti-abortion rights, pro-life doctors, one of their members might be in an emergency room, perhaps when a woman, in the very rare instance in the prescription of this drug, has a complication, and they would be compelled against their conscience and their religious beliefs, many of them, to treat that woman. The court says that is too tenuous. And the other thing they say is that federal law already guarantees, definitively protects any doctor from doing something in this area that would violate their religious beliefs or conscience. They can simply refuse. Those are the words of this unanimous opinion. And so what this really is the court saying, we don't really want activists simply bringing cases to challenge laws that they object to. We need to see how the law is operating on their interests, in their lives, for us to decide whether it is just, constitutional, whether it's working the way Congress intended. And in this case, they said, they just don't have enough injury to demonstrate. They're people with an opinion, not an injury. That was the unanimous opinion. And once again, want to emphasize that. Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, Amy Coney Barrett, all on this opinion, which keeps these doctors out of court. And once again, I want to emphasize, this does not mean any doctor in America will be compelled to treat a woman in a way that might violate their conscience. They are already protected under federal laws, several of them, and the court emphasizes that. And so basically, it's the status quo.
I want to bring in our ABC News Supreme Court contributor, Kate Shaw. Kate, looking at the decision, what sticks out to you in terms of the way it was written, the language used to make this ruling?
Sure. Hi, Diane. Yeah, I mean, I think the court is saying that this case is no different from any other case when it comes to the basic legal requirements to get into federal court, which is that you have to show that you are personally injured by a government law or policy. And what's striking here is that these doctors, they are physicians who argue that it's possible that women who use mifepristone to terminate pregnancies could end up experiencing complications and end up in an emergency room, and they might have to participate in providing some kind of care in violation of their conscience. And what the opinion says really clearly is it's very speculative to begin with that any of these doctors would ever end up in that situation. Mifepristone is a very safe drug. But even if it did happen, federal law protects doctors from having to help out with completing an abortion, say, if they have conscience-based objections to doing that. So essentially, there's no way to claim that these physicians are injured by the FDA's regulation of mifepristone. And in some ways, it's the most surprising thing is that the lower courts believed these doctors did have standing. And I think it's legally the correct result. And, many people thought so. Whatever you think of the merits of the challenge to mifepristone, the parties just didn't have standing. An objection, a moral objection to abortion or mifepristone is not enough to get a court to second guess that kind of decision. And that was pretty clear in, this unanimous opinion.
And let me take that point over to our senior Washington reporter, Devin Dwyer, who covers the Supreme Court for us in detail. Because, Devin, the way this is worded, does this leave the possibility open that they could bring a suit like this again with a different group of doctors or a different group of plaintiffs who can show a better connection to injury?
Potentially, Diane. I mean, what Justice Kavanaugh lays out in pretty clear detail, as Kate was just saying, is that anyone that wants to challenge a government regulation, a law passed by Congress, has to show a concrete injury, the direct line that some government action, some law actually harms them. So in this case, he's saying if you can prove that, sure, give it a try. But in the meantime, Justice Kavanaugh writes that these opponents of the medication, which may have sincere beliefs opposing abortion and opposing the pill, can bring those to policymakers. They can file complaints with the FDA warning about the dangers and have the scientists at FDA weigh those things. So clearly here, Justice Kavanaugh, who in the Dobbs decision 2 years ago was the one who famously wrote that a lot of these debates about abortion should be given back to the states, given back to the policymakers, is saying that pretty clearly again here, that these issues around the pill, they may be legitimate and they should be handled by policymakers, not judges.
And our ABC News senior congressional correspondent Rachel Scott is on Capitol Hill, or near Capitol Hill, I should say, right outside a meeting happening right now between former President Trump and Republican lawmakers in the House. Rachel, former President Trump hasn't offered much in the way of his intended policies and stances on different abortion-related issues. But what do you think it says right now for him to be in this meeting when some of the justices that he appointed just issued this unanimous ruling?
And Diane, look, I will say just pure location-wise, this is pretty notable. We are just blocks away from the U.S. Capitol and blocks away from the U.S. Supreme Court, where the justices just issued this ruling preserving essentially the access to the abortion pill mifepristone used in more than half of abortions in the United States. The former president has been asked repeatedly about his policy on the issue of abortion, and that is because he appointed 3 of the 5 Supreme Court justices that overturned Roe, that cleared the way to 21 states to severely restrict or ban access to abortion. When he was asked about the abortion pill specifically, he said that he does have strong views on that. He promised that he would be releasing his policy stance on it. Well, that was weeks ago, Diane. We have not heard from the former president or his campaign on whether or not he believes that the abortion pill mifepristone should be more heavily regulated or restricted or made available in states where it is legal. And that's really the point that I also want to get to, Diane, here, is because so many eyes were on this decision by the Supreme Court and ultimately this ruling, because this would have had a major impact even in the states where abortion is currently legal. I've been covering this issue now for years, talking to abortion providers. Many people tell me that they get a lot of their abortion pills, the pill mifepristone, by mail, something that is now currently legal, and up to 10 weeks of pregnancy instead of 7, without multiple doctor's visits. And so if these regulations were allowed to be rolled back, it would have a major impact on the ability to access this abortion pill, again, used in more than half of abortions in the United States throughout the country. And that is something that Democrats were very concerned about. We know President Biden has put this issue front and center in his campaign. Vice President Kamala Harris is really leading the charge on reproductive rights for the Biden campaign, making the case to voters across the country and really trying to draw a sharp contrast with former President Donald Trump, Diane.
So, Terry, what does this mean now for states where abortion is prohibited?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I just had somebody in my ear.
Yeah, no, Terry, I'm wondering what this means now for states where abortion is prohibited.
Not much, although there is a future conflict coming. In those states which have sought to restrict, almost to the point of elimination in some of them, access to abortion, mifepristone is a big issue because they want essentially to close that gap. And now that the Supreme Court has said that these doctors aren't going to be able to stop access to mifepristone as the FDA has approved it, then The next battle is going to be the efforts by states to block mifepristone coming through the mails, block access to mifepristone in as much ways as they can. That battle remains to be fought, and there's no question that they are already talking about doing things like that.
And Kate, in terms of precedent here, the way that this ruling is worded, what does this do for future cases brought under the guise of consciousness injuries and conscious protections? And
yeah, I mean, I think that the case reaffirms what the court has previously said, that simply having an objection, even, a sincere one grounded in your conscience, is not enough to get a federal court to hear your claim and potentially to invalidate some government act. There are other avenues if you object to things that government has done. Of course, the ballot is one way to change policy, but also lobbying agencies. The FDA talks to the public. The public can make their views known about mifepristone. Industry groups can do that. There's a lot of back and forth between the FDA and stakeholders. So there are lots of ways to try to change policy. But what the Supreme Court is saying here is that federal courts are really not the forum if all you have is a policy objection, even a legitimate one. But in terms of what Terry was saying, there are 3 red states, including Idaho, that are already interveners in the district court, actually in this very case. So I think that as this case is over, but I think those states are going to be very quickly back in front of the federal court saying, fine, the doctors weren't the right parties, but we are having a very difficult time enforcing our abortion bans because even though these drugs are technically illegal in the states that ban abortion, there are many ways when, mail availability by mail exists. There are lots of ways for individuals who wish to obtain abortions to travel to a nearby state and pick up some drugs that are sent by mail. And so that does happen, even in a post-Dobbs America, people in abortion ban states are finding ways to get these drugs. And so the red states are going to say, and we need to close those loopholes so that we can enforce our abortion bans. And I think the real question, the next question, is what the courts will make of those kinds of arguments.
And Rachel, this is all happening 5 months before Election Day. What kind of an impact is this ruling expected to have on the race for the White House?
It could potentially have a big impact in the sense that abortion rights, it could ultimately define this election. Diane, I'm just looking at my phone because we have sources inside of this meeting right now that have been texting us what the former president is saying to House Republicans. I am told by 2 different sources that he did address the issue of Roe versus Wade, going on to say that it was a complex issue and that they sent it back to the states, something that he is very proud of, saying that Republicans are so afraid of the issue. We would have Republicans are so afraid of the issue, we would have 40 seats. And so this is the former president once again sort of taking this victory lap around appointing the 3 of the 5 Supreme Court justices who overturned Roe versus Wade. And that is the contrast that President Biden and his campaign are really drawing against former President Donald Trump as we near the election. They are trying to place the blame squarely on the former president for sort of the consequences that we have seen sweep across the state in reaction to a lot of these abortion bans that have now gone into place. 21 states have restricted access to abortion. 14 have near total bans on abortion. And the reason why Democrats are really leaning into the issue of abortion rights, Diane, is because every single time it has been on the ballot, all 6 times where it has been on the ballot, the issue of abortion rights has won, even in conservative states like Ohio, Kentucky, and Kansas. And so what we're going to see again as we're leaning into the fall here, we're going to see this issue on the ballot in as many as 12 states, including several battlegrounds. It could possibly be on the ballot in Nevada, as well as Pennsylvania, Arizona, as well as Florida, which Democrats are making a play for. And so Democrats are leaning into this even more. They're hoping that this defines this election, but also they're waiting to see how else the Supreme Court weighs on this issue. We know they're still considering one more case, Diane.
And Devin, what kind of reaction are you seeing to this decision?
Well, we're hearing from the drug company Danco, which manufactures mifepristone, Diane. They are calling this a huge relief for the industry and for preserving the stability of the pharmaceutical business in this country. We had heard ahead of this ruling from a number of institutions, doctors, companies, warning that if a court could simply overturn the FDA's judgment on any medication that is disliked by a certain group of people, say, take on IVF medication, say, take on medication developed with embryonic stem cells, that could cause upheaval not only to business, which is a big part of our economy, but also to some of these life-saving tools that so many Americans rely on. So Danco today, Diane, is saying that this is a huge relief for them. we should say we're also hearing from abortion rights opponents. SBA Pro-Life America just called this a deeply disappointing decision, and they're going to continue to fight access to the pill, Diane, they say, and to other forms of abortion in every state.
Terry, how could this impact future cases related to this issue?
Well, related to the issue of standing, what they decided, it's very interesting. There is a concurrence here by Justice Thomas. He voted with the other 8, so it is a unanimous case, but he wanted to add his own opinion on something in this case, which is that this was a number of pro-life, anti-abortion rights doctors and a couple of associations of doctors who have the same beliefs. And what Thomas noticed is, look, we have a lot of cases, environmental groups, other kinds of groups that sue on behalf of their members. He said that's the problem, the real problem in this case. He said we didn't need to address it to resolve it because the individual doctors don't have standing to sue. But we shouldn't let people, Clarence Thomas essentially says, bring suits on behalf of their members. We need actual human beings who are impacted, because a group isn't really impacted, it's the members. This is an old argument in the Supreme Court, and the only reason that I raise it is because Justice Thomas's dissents over the decades have a tendency under this court, which is far more conservative, to become law. You could make the case that he has had more impact on American law than any justice, because he took these positions that we see over and over, now becoming law under this conservative court. And in his concurrence in this case, he's essentially putting a target on all these nonprofit organizations in civil rights and environmental policy and other issues that bring suits to American courts. And he's saying we need to take a second look at that. So that's for another day.
Devin, we're also awaiting another decision from the Supreme Court on emergency care and abortion access, and whether the federal law governing access to emergency care covers abortions as well. What are you watching for on that decision, and could this mifepristone decision impact that one at all?
It's a good question. It's perhaps an even bigger decision there we're awaiting, Diane. It's a case out of Idaho, and it governs, it would apply to every state in the country. It's the first test of any state abortion ban since the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade 2 years ago. That decision could come any day as well. In that case, as you mentioned, the Supreme Court is looking at whether emergency rooms, even in states where abortion is largely banned, have to provide access to an abortion when a woman's health is at risk. Not just her life, but her health. If her reproductive organs, for example, could be severely threatened by some condition that she presents with in an emergency room. And the Supreme Court was much more divided in that case than they appeared in this case. So there is another major decision on abortion coming. It's not clear that these two will be related. They're very different legal issues, but certainly the court is not done yet speaking on the issue of abortion this term.
Also happening as the Senate is set to vote on a bill to protect IVF access. Could this decision impact that vote?
The decision today is not expected to impact any access to IVF. In fact, the fact that Justice Kavanaugh really dismisses this challenge to an FDA-approved medication on the grounds of standing, and they didn't get into the nitty-gritty of how the FDA approved mifepristone, I think for now protects some of these other medications, including IVF medications that opponents have targeted and talked about. So no direct impact on that today. But the political storm, as you're talking about, is continuing to rage, and across the street from the Supreme Court today, those Democrats are pushing that legislation to protect IVF.
And let's go to Rachel Scott on that. Rachel's just outside a meeting right now between former President Trump and Republican lawmakers. And Rachel, Trump has repeatedly promised to release his policy proposals related to abortion, IVF access, and other topics related to that. But we haven't heard much from the former president yet. What's the latest there?
Yeah, a promise, but no follow-through yet from former President Donald Trump related to whether or not he believes the abortion pill mifepristone needs to be further restricted. He has commented, obviously, on the issue of abortion rights. In fact, I was just talking to a few members who are leaving this meeting with him. How was the meeting with former President Donald Trump?
Awesome.
Did he talk about the issue of abortion rights? Praise that going back to the states? So we just talked to a few members that were leaving who were telling us that the former president sort of took this victory lap talking about this decision to overturn Roe versus Wade, how it sent the issue back to the states. Of course, that is the center of what so many are arguing could define this election at this point. It's a reason why you are seeing sort of these test votes, as you were just talking about with Devin Dwyer there in the Senate. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, he's been sort of putting the issue of reproductive rights, access to IVF, access to contraception on the floor for a vote. How was the meeting, Congressman Gates?
It was a pep rally for President Trump. Yeah, we went from the politics of kind of the realignment we're seeing with a lot of Hispanic voters and African American voters coming our way. President Trump also talked about policy. He pitched the idea of no tax on tips, so that a lot of working class Americans who make money on tips will have that money in their pocket rather than sending it here to Washington, D.C. The president was upbeat. It was a very positive and I would say unifying experience.
Pretty notable that this meeting is occurring just blocks away from the Supreme Court. We just saw this ruling come down on the abortion pill mifepristone. We're hearing that inside the former president talked about this issue of abortion rights being left up to the states. What did he say?
He didn't address the ruling explicitly, but there was a very serious discussion about how Republicans are going to talk about abortion in the upcoming election. President Trump reiterated his perspective that this is a state issue. He thought that gave members who have different views on this issue in our conference an ability to really localize it rather than having to talk about it in the broadest of national terms.
What did he have to say, obviously, about the criminal justice system, the Department of Justice? Any strong words for the DOJ?
He's concerned about the weaponization, and he talks about what we have to do to fight against that. President Trump believes the House of Representatives has a critical role in utilizing the power of the subpoena, the power of the purse. I don't think we've done that with sufficient rigor in the absence of President Trump being here in Washington leading us, and he's going to be the masthead for that effort in the coming months.
Did he urge
President Trump might be a drag on the ticket for down ballot Republicans?
To the contrary, President Trump talked about the specific strategies he was going to use to ensure that Trump voters show up in November and that they go all the way down the ticket. You know, he was there to really let Republicans know that he was there to elect big majorities in the House and the Senate, and that he thought that would be essential to getting his agenda accomplished, and that he was going to be, his goal was to do 100 telephone town halls for members to ensure a robust majority.
What about on foreign policy and the differences he may handle, like Ukraine and Russia, compared to President Biden?
President Trump reflected on the fact that it is a travesty in our country that you've got troops who are on food stamps, who are not even getting minimum wage when you look at the hours that they're putting in. And he lamented the fact that we're sending $60 billion to Ukraine and we're not paying our troops more. So President Trump was explicitly a critic of the Ukraine aid and a supporter of the increases in pay for American troops. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. All right, so thanks for sticking with us there, Diane. Obviously, these members are just leaving the Capitol Hill Club here just moments after having this meeting with former President Donald Trump. What you heard there from Congressman Matt Gaetz tracks from what we were hearing from sources inside of the room, that the former president praised Roe versus Wade being overturned, that this decision should be sent back to the states. We also heard that he used very strong language criticizing the Department of Justice. This, as the former president is obviously facing multiple criminal charges and was just convicted on those 34 counts of falsifying business records. But as you can tell just by the reaction from members leaving this meeting, this is a Republican Party that is standing firmly behind the former president, and we are told it is because they see their success and their possibility of expanding their majority in the House and keeping the House majority tied to his success in November, Diane.
And we heard Representative Gaetz there saying that they understand their party has different opinions on the topic of abortion. More to come on that, but of course this comes as the Supreme Court just ruled unanimously to maintain the FDA's loosened restrictions on the abortion pill mifepristone. I want to go back to our Terry Moran on that ruling. Terry, what are you watching for next? There are a number of big decisions we are expecting from the court over the course of the next few weeks. What are you watching for there, and what do you think the big takeaway is from this ruling on mifepristone, especially 5 months away from an election?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. What does it tell us about the court? That it is unanimous, that all 9 justices voted the same way, which you don't see a lot in these big cases. And I do think that there is an effort on the part of the court. After all the upheaval, after overturning Roe versus Wade, after striking down affirmative action, this court feels like it's swinging for the fences, as it were, and sometimes gets out in front of its own authority. Remember, the authority of the court rests entirely in the respect that the country has for it. And while many people support those opinions, many don't. Chief Justice John Roberts, who's an institutionalist, has sought to protect the court's authority and stature in the country by things like, if we can be unanimous, let's be unanimous. Just a few weeks ago, there was an argument in a case, a different case, and they were arguing about some point of law, and Chief Justice Roberts said, you know, last week we just handed down an opinion where we were all unanimous on something similar, and Justice Thomas started laughing, and he said, well, we kept it short. And you could almost sense that there between them was an effort, a little bit of maybe arm twisting by the Chief Justice. Look, we don't need to say more than we need to say. Let's, as much as we can, stay together. Of course, in these big cases coming down, they can't, because they have to do with abortion. There's another abortion rights case. You know, there are major cases coming down, obviously, on President Trump, his claim of absolute criminal immunity for his actions after the 2020 election up to January 6th and beyond. So some big cases they're going to be divided on. But what this tells me is the court is looking for ways to stay together and to keep its decisions as narrow as possible when it can.
All right, Terry Moran, Kate Shaw, Rachel Scott, Devin Dwyer, thank you all, and we will have more news right after the break. Stay with us.
Whenever news breaks,
Incidents raising concerns among local leaders. ABC News senior investigative correspondent Aaron Katursky has that story.
Masked protesters took over this New York City subway car and demanded riders identify themselves if they're Zionists.
Raise your hands if you're a Zionist! Raise your hands if you're a Zionist! This is your chance to get out! This is your chance to get out! Okay, no Zionists, we're good.
The train was held on the station. Officers in riot gear descended onto the platform as some protesters clashed with police. They were part of a rally that included a large banner, "Long Live October 7th," and the flags of terror groups Hamas and Hezbollah. Protesters chanted, "Long live the Intifada," a reference to Palestinian uprisings, and set off flares outside an exhibit remembering the victims of the October 7th Hamas attack on Israel. Mayor Eric Adams called it reprehensible and vile.
I thought the actions that we saw in front of the exhibit was just despicable.
This surveillance video shows people getting out of a truck, spilling red paint on the street outside the Manhattan office of the Palestinian Authority, and scattering leaflets that called for more violence against Israel. Red paint and a threatening sign defaced the home of the director of the Brooklyn Museum, who was Jewish. On the door, they painted an inverted red triangle, a symbol used by Hamas. Majority Leader Chuck Schumer showed the pictures on the Senate floor.
This is not even close to free speech. It is intimidation, invasive attacks loaded with the threat of looming violence.
Diane, police are now investigating whether this hateful vandalism is the work of the same people. And what you heard on that subway car is no longer a matter of free speech. Asking Zionists to identify themselves, the NYPD considers an implicit threat, and detectives are looking to charge the leader of that call and response with attempted coercion. Diane?
Aaron Katursky, thank you. Coming up, understanding how animals communicate with each other, why researchers now believe elephants give each other names, and how they figured it out. But first, celebrating 20 years of Queer Eye for the Straight Guy, the White House is honoring the iconic show. Executive producer David Collins and cast member Jay Rodriguez are joining us next to tell us all about it.
Whenever, wherever news breaks, it's so important to always remember that lives are changed. Here in London, in Buffalo, Uvalde, Texas, Edinburgh, Scotland. Reporting from Rolling Fork, Mississippi. Ukrainian refugees here in Warsaw. We're heading to a small community outside of Mexico City. Getting you behind the stories as they happen. ABC News Live Prime. We'll take you there.
Stream ABC News Live weeknights wherever you stream your news. Only on ABC News Live. What does it take to be the most watched newscast in America?
We are part of an operation.
Is this our combat operations center?
We're approaching the gate. Militants came in from different directions. Nuclear reactor. So you have a couple loaded and ready to go. The house is destroyed, but the flag...
Not a tear in it.
How important it made the USA. Great work.
Hi.
Appreciate you. Thank you.
Ismail? David.
David. I'm David Muir.
I know who you are.
You
Watch
do?
you every night.
ABC's World News Tonight with David Muir is America's most watched newscast.
All right, let the dogs out, please.
I don't think he's going to give you a hard time.
Even if he gives me a hard time, I'm the right guy.
You can handle it.
I want to make sure that we all learn together.
Calm, confident.
Calm, confident, calm, surrender.
Everything that he's taught has become a reality.
Yeah.
We are so grateful and impressed. I feel like crying. You changed our world.
It is a beautiful thing to see. As you rehabilitate the dog, you also rehabilitate you.
There is a price to be paid every time a survivor shares their story. I will not be silenced.
Do you feel the church accepted abuse?
I wouldn't say accepted it as so much pretended it didn't exist.
Yep, that's him.
Yep.
Ready? Kira Phillips with ABC News. Does your church protect sexual predators?
The powerful new Impact by Nightline. Secrets of the 2x2 Church.
There's nothing pretty about hearing this.
Now streaming on Hulu.
How do you feel?
Gay as hell.
I love it here.
Is this real?
100%.
I think you still look at me that way.
Will you marry me? I want pageantry that takes months and months to plan.
My girls have
Why do so many people start their day here?
From ABC News, this is Start Here.
To be in the know and get a different take on the day's top stories. Start here.
Now, that's a part of the story I bet you didn't see coming.
Make it your daily first listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Reporting on the trial of Hunter Biden in Wilmington, Delaware, I'm Olivia Rubin. Wherever the story is, we'll take you there. You're streaming ABC News Live.
Welcome back to ABC News Live. First, the iconic show Queer Eye is celebrating 20 years on the air. Vice President Kamala Harris is set to honor the creators and cast members today for bringing joy and fashion to millions while also advancing LGBTQI+ representation. And Queer Eye's executive producer David Collins and original cast member Jay Rodriguez are here to tell us all about it. Thank you both for coming on. Jay, how does it feel to think back to that first episode? Did you ever think then we will be doing this for 20 years?
No, Dad, absolutely not. I was 23. I'd just come off a Broadway show. We were on a little cable station called Bravo that really only had Inside the Actors Studio. So when Dave Collins, Michael Williams, and Bravo gave us a chance, there I am. I look exactly the same. You're welcome 21 years later. Just kidding. You know, we had no idea the cultural impact. We had no idea. We were making a comedy. We had comedy directors. And what came out of that was a connection, a true connection between queer folk and straight folks that hadn't been represented in television before. And us just being our authentic selves is, I think, what moved folks and really started celebrating the connections that we can form as two people who might be different on the outside, you think, but ultimately we're all human and we have so much more in common than we do that is different.
And David, particularly on this Pride Month, what impact do you think this show has made over those 20 years? Picking up off what Jay just said.
Sure. I think the most important part is that it created a comfortable opportunity in homes for people to have a conversation, families with their kids to talk to their parents. We have so many letters and emails over the past 20 years of moms and dads just saying, thank you so much for the original cast and the new cast to create an environment where we can have a conversation that's loving and authentic and vulnerable, quite frankly, where we get to see real guys living their real lives.
Of all time.
It will be the first time the Queer Eye creators, past and present cast members, will all be together to commemorate this anniversary. How do you feel about seeing everyone?
That's an amazing opportunity, right? From 20 years ago when Honestly, Carson Kressley used to joke, do you believe in gay marriage? And he'd say, as long as there's gay divorce. And all the way now to where a lot of our members are married and have children. I have teenage daughters. So this opportunity to bring us all together again and be part of the White House and go and have a roundtable with Madam Vice President, it's a true honor. What an absolute honor.
And Jay, on that note, Vice President Harris officiated the first legally recognized same-sex marriage 20 years ago. Now here you are, you'll be celebrating with her today at the White House, the 20th anniversary of your show. What are you most looking forward to today, and what's next for Queer Eye?
What's really remarkable is just the idea that when I was shooting the show, marriage equality was not the law of the land. So we had key audiences who loved us, who welcomed us into private spaces, their living rooms, and they watched the show with their family. And, sometimes are voting against us being able to marry, but celebrating us. So it was a weird thing to reconcile. 21 years later, here we are, we have marriage equality, and that is something we definitely want to hold on to. And I think going to the White House symbolizes on a very, very big way for, I think, many of us, the progress that we've made, and also emphasizes how much further we still have to go for total and full equality and equity.
All right, executive producer David Collins and original cast member Jay Rodriguez, thank you both. Congratulations.
Thank you so much, Diane.
Thank you, Dana.
Thank you. And be sure to catch our ABC News Live special, Pride Across America. We will go coast to coast, featuring Pride marches in New York City, Chicago, and San Francisco, with special interviews and inspiring stories spotlighting today's influential LGBTQ+ leaders. The fun kicks off Sunday, June 30th at 11 a.m. Eastern, right here on ABC News Live. We hope we'll check it out. And coming up, former President Trump is expected to arrive on Capitol Hill any minute now, while he's meeting with Republican lawmakers nearby and how their support could impact the election. Also ahead, the deadly bus hijacking horror. New details about how authorities say it all unfolded as we hear from some passengers and the driver held at gunpoint. Plus, gearing up for your summer getaway, how to save before taking to the air, seas, or road, and tips on getting through the airport faster.
Trans youth are vulnerable, and they are at risk of bullying, harassment, and discrimination. And so we really need to work to support trans youth and to help them and to nurture them.
Whenever news breaks,
We are here in Israel, a nation at war.
In Rolling Fork, this tornado tore through this town.
From Lewiston, Maine.
The scene of a horrific mass shooting.
from the scene of that deadly missile strike, ABC News Live everywhere.
In Iceland, let's go.
On the 2024 campaign trail.
Here at 10 Downing Street.
Wherever the story is.
We're going to take you there. You're streaming
ABC News Live.
ABC News Live.
You're streaming ABC News Live.
ABC News Live, streaming free everywhere. What does it take to be the most watched newscast in America?
An operation to capture ISIS fighters.
Is this our Combat Operations Center?
We're approaching the gate now. Militants came in from 4 or 5 different directions. Operational nuclear reactor. So you have a couple loaded and ready to go. The house is destroyed, but the flag, there's not a tear in it. Not a tear in it. How important is this label right here, Made in the USA? Look at your smile. You're proud of this.
I love this.
Great work. Hi. Where are you? Where are you? Appreciate you. Thank you, David. Good to meet you. Ismail? David.
David.
Yes, yes. I'm David Muir.
I know who you are.
You
I watch
do?
you every night.
ABC's World News Tonight with David Muir is America's most watched newscast. Why do so many people start their day here?
This is Start Here.
To be in the know and get a different take on the day's top stories. Listen now to the Daily News Podcast honored with 4 Edward R. Murrow Awards. Start Here, ABC News. Make it your daily first listen, wherever you get your podcasts. Start Here.
Covering the very latest on the immigration front along the southwest border in El Paso, I'm Idea Villarreal. Wherever the story is, we'll take you there. You're streaming ABC News Live.
Are you ready to celebrate? Sunday, June 30th, across the country. See, experience some of the nation's greatest pride celebrations all in one place as they happen live right here on ABC News Live. Pride across America. Celebrate joy, love, freedom, and pride. Sunday, June 30th, starting at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Streaming on ABC News Live and stream on Hulu.
First thing in the morning.
There's a lot going on.
We're still in a flash flood warning. To catch you up with what happened overnight. Police in riot gear arresting dozens of protesters.
What's happening today? Escalating tensions in the Middle East.
What people are talking about. The migrant crisis.
Fast, straightforward.
With some fun in between.
Check out the Gator on the 17th hole.
The buzz